I want to maybe begin by talking about the through line with the two books, or how one leads to the other, and sort of how over the past, I would say, 5 or 6 years of my life, this focus in my research brought me first to working on the Sun of Knowledge, and then in a very similar vein to Precession of the Night Theater and Exposition on the Lunar Stations. So that through line, or that thread, would be the lunar stations, or as people know them, the lunar mansions. So if you've never heard of the lunar mansions, they are the zodiac of the moon. We're all familiar with the zodiac of the sun, I would imagine. The 12 signs, Aries through Pisces, right? Everyone knows the zodiac of the sun? Cool. So there's a lunar zodiac as well, where in Indian astrology and Jyotish, they have what are called nakshatras, which make up a large part of this book, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but tends to be 27 in terms of quantity of that lunar zodiac for most Vedic astrologers, although there is a hidden 28th, which is the star Abhijit, which is the star Vega, a vulture star, as some of us may know. But more often than not, when we encounter the lunar mansions in the Western magical tradition, and maybe you'll see me do scare quotes for Western anything, because there are scholars now who are making more of an active attempt, Matthew Melvin Kushki is coming to mind, to include Islam and Islamic esotericism and mysticism into the Western canon, which I would support that. I don't see as much of a distinction between Islam and esotericism and magic from that culture with what we would broadly consider Western, but perhaps that's another conversation. Excuse me entirely, I'm speaking very fast. Tell me if you need me to slow down. I'm just like boom, 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 boom once you get me going. Okay, so when we encounter the lunar mansions, it's usually in the quantity of 28. So many of you may be familiar with a book of astrological magic called the Picatrix. I see some heads being nodded. There's probably like 3 or 4 versions being sold here at Watkins, I would guess. And when we encounter it in the Western magical tradition, usually it's the Latin form. But there is an original Arabic, it's originally an Arabic book. The scholar Liana Saif is doing an Arabic translation into English, which we're all very excited for that when that comes out. Send her your best for that to happen sooner than later. But the Latin and the Arabic versions are going to inevitably be different. So how we've encountered the lunar mansions largely stems from the Arabic tradition of magic. But we can't look at any of these things in a vacuum. We can't look at really any magic or anything in general in isolation. And so this book is sort of acknowledging that we cannot look at the lunar mansions or the various magics, astrological interpretations of the lunar mansions in isolation. So in this book, it is based on this through line, which is primarily for me influenced on the Arabic lunar mansions. So Islam is the culture and the religion that I was raised in, Shia in particular. And that influence is there for me, no doubt. But the other side of my family is also from Mexico, from Yucatan, and we have a rich heritage of stargazing in the cultures of the Americas as well. Whether you want to call that astrology or not is sort of a semantic thing. We don't have to get into that either. But moving from the Arabic heritage of the lunar mansions, which is really my contribution to the Sun of Knowledge here, though this is a book of magic which goes beyond the lunar mansions, my focus primarily was based on the 28 lunar mansions. Moving from that to this is seeing that the stars and our observation of the stars is something which is not only solely situated in the Arabic tradition, even though that is largely the transmission that we've gotten in Western magic. But that sky observation in particular, as well as the movement of the moon in relation to the way that we practice our various stargazings is not unique to any one culture. So this book is my attempt to bring together as many cultural traditions based on stargazing and the star's interaction with the moon as possible. So that's a very sort of quick and dirty, but maybe incomprehensible summary that I just gave you. But I am going to read a little bit from it because there's a lot more than that. Oh, hey, look who just walked into the room. I was just talking about you only a few minutes ago. Only good things. We'll have much to talk about in the Q&A, hopefully, now that Dr. Inlows is here. But, okay, so we'll talk more about the Shams al-Ma'arif later, but Precession of the Night Theater. So I couldn't, because I'm an artist, because I'm a writer, because I'm writing more and more poetry these days, because I can't just do a book about astrology, because I can't just do a book about magic. There has to be some sort of creative or artistic element to it. Because fundamentally for me, what stargazing is and what astrology come down to, especially in their more magical iterations, it's about images, and it's about our relationship with terms that gets used for the magic that you will encounter and hear, no doubt. But in particular in the Shams al-Ma'arif, in the Picatrix, which the Arabic name is the Ghayat al-Hakim, the sort of magic that you'll encounter is often called image magic, is what you'll hear it referred to as. And the scholarly version of what image magic is referencing a very particular sort of milieu that the milieu that the Picatrix emerged out of, which is this Muslim. Oh, hi, friends are coming in. It has a strong Islamic esoteric brand to it, and is the combination typically of engraving or drawing images on a variety of different materials during auspicious timings. So people might recognize this as like, oh, that's the magic of the Picatrix first and foremost. But when I think of image magic, once again, I can't just stop with that, because I'm thinking about, well, what is the magic of images more broadly? Why does it just have to be this very narrow sort of scholarly definition of the thing? Why can't we think about how images are magic? So, you know, the classic stereotypical, but also admittedly problematic version as we think of like voodoo dolls and puppets and this sort of thing. I have initiations in Afro-diasporic traditions, so I sort of veer away from the problematic stereotypes around that, but oftentimes people think of image magic, that's what they go to. They think of like an image, which doesn't have to be a two-dimensional image, but it could be a three-dimensional sculpture, and manipulating the image in some form to get a certain kind of result. That's also image magic, at least as I would think of image magic. And so in that respect, moving from more of the stricter definition of image magic in the Shams al-Ma'arif or in the Picatrix to Precession of the Night Theater, I'm looking at the heritage of the 1001 Nights, which my father used to read to me when Laylah wa-Laylah in Arabic when I was a little kid, and I was always so my imagination was always so stimulated by these stories. And the transmission of these stories is a fascinating one, which I don't have time to get into, but they have just as much of a crooked and wayward transmission as any book of magic might have, in the sense that some of the stories that my father was reading to me in Arabic were actually later attributions by European authors. And in this same way, the 1001 Nights is a sort of grimoire or book of magic unto itself, or a series of different books of magic unto themselves. And this is my inspiration for Precession of the Night Theater, which is that this broader idea of what image magic can be also incorporates things like fantasy, also incorporates things like poetry, and also gets out of analyzing particularities of a single culture to see where various cultures are sharing in similarities with images. So the process that I'm fascinated with, if I'm going to distill it, is what is our consciousness doing when we're looking up at the stars, right, which are just dots in the sky. There are constellations that are formed out of the negative space between stars, but that's also something that we probably don't have time to talk about now. Constellations are culturally constructed. Anyways, dots in the sky, right? And so when we connect those dots together and form images to make constellations, what is our consciousness doing when we are going through that process? That is what imagination is, right? We are imaging something where that image does not necessarily exist in a kind of objective form. So when I teach classes, oftentimes I'll show an image of or picture, a photograph of the stars of Taurus, the stars we know as Taurus, and I'll ask everyone, what stars are these? And people will typically know because the stars of Taurus have this bright red star right at the eye, which is Aldebaran. And I show people the cave paintings in Lascaux, which many believe are influenced by early forms of stargazing going back 20,000 years or further. And then I ask everyone, okay, how did we get from just looking up at dots of light in the sky to painting vast murals of potentially constellations? I like to think of them as constellations, proto-constellations, however you want to refer to them, in caves. And then later on coming up with whole books and systems and advanced astronomy and everything else. What is this process which moves from dots in the sky to all of these advanced systems of knowledge that we use, including magic and astrology and the rest of it? Well, that's the procession of the night theater. That's a kind of processional process. Night theater in the sense that we're looking at images, we're looking at moving images, right? So we're looking at performances that change night after night. So the moon is the fastest moving planet. So the moon gets associated with travel, with movement. If you look at where the moon is in the 12-sign solar zodiac, roughly every 2.5 days, the moon is changing signs. So the moon is known as being fast-paced and representing people that are on their feet, always on the move. And that was part of all the traveling inspiration for this book, and thinking about texts like The 1001 Nights, where many of these stories come from essentially what we would think of as fireside, like campfire stories, I guess, in this way. So as caravans would move through, vast deserts and over the Silk Road and these kinds of, in particular, ancient forms of travel, but we still do this today. Stories were exchanged, right, in transit, and this is what this book is about for me. There's the what I've referred to as the solary aspect of the book, where I'm putting together what's 3-4 years of research of various bits of cultural information, astrological interpretations, and whatnot. And then there's the night side virgin. Is that a weird Freudian slip? The night side virgin. I like the way that sounds. Night side version, which is the introduction and the beginning of this book, which is a little bit more in the lineage of the 1001 Nights. It's fiction, it's poetry, it's storytelling. And there isn't a kind of linear logic to it in the same way that the day side part of the book is broken down into. So I've been talking a lot. Let me slow it down a little bit and maybe share some of the book itself. It'll be a little harder to see on video. So the introduction and the first part, or you can see here, night and day. So this is what I was just referring to as the breakdown of the book, I guess. So the night side begins with the third night. So a lot of people ask why I begin with 3 instead of 1. Well, the Pleiades would be 3. So many ancient cultures began with the Pleiades. So the Mexican side of me knows that in the myths, the stars of what I think are Aldebaran, so Taurus, what we know as Taurus, and the stars of the Pleiades are the beginning and the end of the cosmos. So the interaction between those stars, and for many cultures, the chase between the hunting stars of Taurus, or sometimes Orion, and the seven sisters who are being chased by the hunter, which are the Pleiades, it is this interaction which keeps the cosmos going. I talked a little bit about this because we see it in the Sefer Yetzirah, text of Jewish Kabbalism, the same interaction which is keeping things going along the celestial pole, keeps things turning. And so I thought it appropriate to begin with the third night instead of the traditional first, because the first, making up the stars of Aries, is a little bit more of what we think of with the solar zodiac. So even when I referred to the solar zodiac, it was like, oh, Aries is the first sign. Right? That's how it's all ingrained within us. But if we're looking at the stars and the process of precession, which also factors into, of course, the name of the book and the broader theme of the book, then we're looking at a slippage which occurs that is called the precession of the equinoxes. How many of you are familiar with the precession of the equinoxes? Okay, so we were talking about Mithras earlier. It's likely that the mysteries of Mithras were also probably related to the precession of the equinoxes. That's also built into this book because I wanted this to have literally everything that it could possibly have in it. Precession is important, and more I've been talking about the slippage between these same starry images. When over roughly 72 years you get about 1 degree of slippage. So if you're looking at like 2,000 years, which was roughly the last time that the two zodiacs, meaning the sidereal and the tropical zodiac, were about aligned. When I say sidereal and tropical zodiac, does everyone know what that distinction is?
Yeah.
Okay. No? So the short of it would be that the sidereal zodiac is following just the stars itself. But the tropical zodiac is a little bit more seasonal, and there's a slippage that occurs between them, wherein what 0 degrees Aries, so the first degree of Aries about 2,000 years ago, they were the same if you were looking at the stars rising in the east on the spring equinox, for the stars itself and for the season of spring. About 2,000 years ago, they were the same. 2,000 years later, you see that slippage of roughly, I think, 24 degrees and change. I don't have the exact numbers memorized, but I would say roughly. And so that difference is fascinating to me, and also gets into this weird territory, this weird liminal territory that I think this book lives in. Because we're looking at the transmission of magic, of images, of writing over these many hundreds of years, and what happens to these images as they morph and change, and there's errors in scribal errors and all this sort of thing. Like, what happens to these magics? What happens to these images? And so the third night, beginning with the third night, is one of these things that changes as the procession of the night theater moves along. So 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, culture would be more inclined to begin with what I'm referring to as the third night, but we would say the Pleiades. But now, as things have processed, as things have moved on, as the night theater has moved to a different town, we think of Aries as the beginning point, as the initiating point. So I thought to give due credit to the Pleiades that I would begin on the third night. And I use sidereal reckonings, which I don't want to get too bogged down before the Q&A in the technical differences between sidereal and tropical zodiacs. If people are interested in that, I'm happy to address it in the Q&A. But right now we are in the sidereal first night, which I think is a good, appropriate night to be having this conversation, and to for me to be visiting London for the first time. First night being, at least as we would have it, in our processed condition, a kind of initiating energy. So I think, and I had no script for this, just so everyone knows, but I figured I would read a little something from here. So I'm going to read the first night. So the first night corresponding to the first lunar mansion, the first lunar station, in the night side of the book, the fictional, poetic, fantastical side of the book. Apologies unaccepted, thank you very much. I will close myself into a scarf with a grimace replica never before seen. My teeth were cut on practice, trial and error. Something like repetitive double takes and scene clippings edited into a fury. My skin peels, it's a new fashion. Exercising my rights at no expense. Our world, an oyster. Let me tell you that much. I slurp its flesh and carve decorations on its shell. I wear the sea and its many colors. I make it all my bitch and continue to laugh about it. I walk with the new skin. Hyde laughs with me and Jekyll at me. Rejections unaccepted. Kowtowing all will as I look back and laugh and spit and cry. You cannot. You will not. There is nothing else to it but that. Get in my face about it if you want. Have you ever met me before? Like, really met me? I'm a son of a bitch. My parents live in the sky. Have you met my brother? Have you met my other half, the silent one? Don't be fooled by his demeanor. He is even harsher than myself. We became closer as we sought out battles and gatherings and confluences together. We realized we could work together, even if it meant destruction as a necessary prelude to creation. So that's the first night. Short, quick, dirty, maybe even a little angry. Not a little angry, like maybe very angry. The first night associated with the stars of Aries, there's a martial connection. Hello. Yeah, it's gonna have some spice to it, right? But when people think of interpreting stars and the images of stars astrologically, magically, is that where they would go to, writing weird little bits of fiction, prose, poetry, whatever you want to call it? Most don't. I'm sure there's books in Watkins that have that sort of experimental thing. But I wanted at least a third or a half of this book to be that, because I hope you can smell what I'm cooking here. It's a book about images just as much as it's a book about astrology or magic. So because we're in the first night, I'm going to go to the dayside portion of the book and read a little bit about that. So the dayside portion of the book is less dreamlike, it's less Lynchian, if you will. It's much more, when we're opening up a book of astrology, what we would expect to read and see. What was that? A scream? That was perfect.
Someone's excited.
Of course. I live in New York City. I'm all about it. Yeah. Okay. So the chapter heading, I'm not going to read the full chapter because it's just a lot of information too, but I called it Two Horns, Lightning from Heaven. So the Arabic name for this lunar station is Al-Sharatain, which the translation is sometimes the two horns. There's a lot of like horn imagery associated with Aries, but also downward pointing horn triangle imagery as well, which comes a little bit more with the second station. But the two horns, which would be facing outward or vertically upwards. So the precise tropical coordinates, I don't want to get too much in the minutiae of the technical details, but I use precise tropical coordinates. So in the spirit of precession, the alignments would be, they're not sidereal, they're not tropical, but they're somewhere in between, as is everything with this damn book. So when I say it's tropical, you would find it on the tropical zodiac. So it's 24 degrees Aries to 7 degrees Taurus, tropically speaking. When I say it's not fully tropical, it's sidereal in the sense that the coordinates are precessed. So as I said earlier, every 72 years you're looking at about 1 degree. That's the rough take on it. And so every 72 years, that 24 degrees Aries will move to 25, 26, etc., through the zodiac. So the closest example that I have to how I reckon the positions of the lunar stations, of those 28 signs of the lunar zodiac, is the way that we use fixed stars in Western astrology. Except there's 2 coordinates as opposed to 1. The fixed stars have single coordinates. This has a beginning and an ending. It's a lunar station. Okay, so al-Sharatain is the 2 signs. This is the Arabic. The 2 signs, the 2 horns, the emphasis being on two-ness. Ibn Arabi associates this. So Ibn Arabi is a mystic who has his own section here at Watkins, which is fabulous. That made me so happy and at home to see that. But Ibn Arabi needs no introduction. Maybe we'll talk more about Ibn Arabi later. There was definitely, I know Dr. Enlos talked a little bit about Ibn Arabi in his confluence with Ahmad al-Buni, and them sort of arising out of a similar milieu with what's known as lettrism, or the kind of magic that we encounter in the Shams al-Ma'arif. But so Ibn Arabi referred to this lunar station as al-Qalam, and I think that that's because of its association with the Arabic letter alif, which looks like a pen. It has this same vertical spinal quality to it. But it also is the communication of divine information moving downward into the terrestrial dimension, which would be the horizontal plane, if you will. So this is the realm of Al-Kalam, where we are right now. And also is the divine essence. The image in the Picatrix, or the Ghaid al-Hakim, is of a dark warrior holding a weapon in his hand. So we've been talking about the way that we see, that's probably very Aries influenced, right? We're talking about the stars of Aries here. I would imagine that there's a martial influence there, if we're looking at a warrior holding a weapon. But if you look at the decans, which are of a similar tradition and of a likeness, because they're sidereal, meaning stellar in origin, just a 10-degree division of the the solar zodiac. There's a similar image for the first decan of Aries, where it's an axe sort of divided in 2, or at least that's the way that Austin Coppock has described it in his book 36 Decans, which probably you don't have here because nobody has that book, because it will probably never be printed again, but that's something else. So we're thinking about two-ness, right? We were talking a little bit about nakshatras earlier, and maybe we can get into those differences later with the sidereal and tropical. The Arabic tradition has largely moved into tropical reckonings purely, although it's my understanding that they did not begin that way. But we're also talking about a time and cultural transmission where the 2 zodiacs were closer to each other. So the difference between the tropical and sidereal zodiacs were not as far apart, right? When that transmission was happening. But we're talking about two-ness with this lunar station, with this sign. And so we're looking at the same stars with the nakshatra. And when I say nakshatra, it's just the Vedic astrology, the Jyotish name for the lunar mansions, except they more often than not use 27 instead of 28. And this would be the sign of the twin horses, Ashvini. I was taking some pictures by my hotel earlier. I'm staying over in Dalston, and there is a road called Ashvin Street, or Ashvin Road, over by where I'm at, and that's the lunar station that we're in right now, timing-wise. So I was just posting on Instagram. I was like, "We're living in it. This is how we do it." Like, you know, it's not abstract. Like, this is the fabric of reality. This is living in the sublunary realm, however you want to refer to it. And for me, all those things are like wonderful, I guess, solipsistic confirmation bias at times. But I appreciate seeing those little things, but the name of the nakshatra is Asvini. So these are the horse twins in Vedic mythology, and they're doctoring twins. So they're like Castor and Pollux, they're like Cosmos and Damian, and other doctoring twins who they heal, but also they do weird Frankenstein surgeries on people, which if you read about them in the Vedas, this is like they're doing surgical procedures and whatnot. And so we see this strong Aries-like quality because there is a cutting here. And when we think of the act of cutting, we think of things being divided into two, right? So the Arabic tradition, the two horns, the nakshatra, the twin horses, things being split apart into two. And then, so the next tradition that I bring in is the Chinese tradition of the lunar stations, referred to as the shu, which is like a lunar lodge. I refer to them as stations instead of mansions, and this is a good time to mention it, because of this traveling quality of the moon that I talked about. So, you know, a mansion, that there's a or Manzil in Arabic, there's a kind of opulent connotation to that as a mansion, a big fancy house, right? But really, because the moon moves so quickly, she, they, him, they're just stopping by the star. It's like it's just a lodge before the next journey, the next leg of the journey, right? And so I think lodge or station is a better word to use than lunar mansion. That's my proclivity, but just to give you a little bit more context about why this is called an exposition on the lunar stations instead of the lunar mansions. So the shu, the Chinese tradition, it refers to the station as a bond or a mound. The stars over here, which don't always align depending on the culture. It's not like every culture that has a lunar station is using the exact same specific stars, but they're definitely nearby. They also have a strong tradition of using animal correspondences with the different stations. So here we're looking at the rabbit, tails, but also the dog. The dog is heavily associated with this lunar station. And then I bring in a lot of other correspondences that people wouldn't necessarily know are related to the lunar mansions / stations, like geomantic correspondences. How many people know what geomancy is here?
It's the shape of the earth.
Yeah. There's like ley line type geomancy, and then there's also like in Arabic it would be ramal, or sand carving sort of divination, this thing. But also there's a strong my colleague and good friend Dr. Al Cummins, who's from the UK, does a lot with English geomancy in terms of scholarship and classes and whatnot. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his work, but there are geomantic correspondences between the lunar stations and between the two. So this one would be, the Latin name would be Acquisitio, which has this kind of like a goodie bag shape to it. We also in the Afro-diaspora, but also in the Yoruba culture of Ifa, they have these shapes as well in their divination system of Ifa in particular. So that's also a whole other tangent which we don't have time for. And then in the PGM, the Greek magical papyri, in the Greek tradition, there's also animal correspondences with the lunar stations. So there is a list in the Greek magical papyri called the prayer to Mene, associated with the moon deity Selene, where there's 28 animals, but not only animals. There's also esoteric symbols like the wand and the key and this sort of thing. And there's a list of 28 that most people associate with the lunar mansions. And then I've also added words. So you have the fiction, fantasy, poetry section, which is the night side at the beginning, but also certain just word correspondences that I encountered with the signs. So for this one I wrote lightning, sudden change, the carnival around every corner, friction, travel, grindcore, dangerous, perfection, splendor, just a series of different words. And then I do a description of the station, which is about a page, and then a description or analysis of the 7 classical planets in each of the stations, which I think there's been maybe a few people who have done this, but by and large this isn't something that people have done when they refer to the lunar mansions. It's just the moon that you get. But I'm also talking about, what does Jupiter look like in this lunar station? What does Saturn look like in this lunar station? And a description for all 28 of the stations. So that, the day side is 28 of the lunar mansions. The night side is 28 little chapters, and then there's an introduction, and that's about the book Procession of the Night Theater. I would normally at this point like poll people and be like, because I didn't have this scripted, but also I don't want to just monologue. I also want to talk about what people are interested in as well. So we don't have to transition into Q&A right now, but are people interested in the connection between these 2 books more? Do people want to know more about that? I see some heads nodding. I'll also take a moment to... The Sun of Knowledge and Procession of the Night Theater. So maybe I'll do a little chronology or my own personal history and how the 2 were related. So when I got into Al-Buni and the Shams al-Ma'arif, it all started with a class that I taught. I don't even remember the name of the class now at this point, but it was on the lunar mansions in the, in the Arabic grimoire tradition, and Dr. Amina Enlows was in that class and reached out to me after that class like, hey, what do you think about doing the Sun of Knowledge? We haven't had an English translation that isn't like a super sketchy one. And the rest is history. This was released in late 2021, December 2021, I think. And as I mentioned, it was my exploring my own heritage, and also the cross-section with astrology in my heritage, with Islamic esotericism and Ibn Arabi, and just getting into like what do I have in the cultures that I am from, as opposed to all the things that I'm encountering on a daily basis. And I took a really great class in college on Islamic mysticism, and eventually I was led to the lunar stations, which do show up in the Quran. We see them in the Quran. There's a reference at the end of Procession of the Night Theater. And for the moon, we have given station so that it might return to the shape of an aging palm frond. We encounter the Manzils, or the stations of the moon, in the Quran. This is something that goes way, way back. And in these explorations of Islamic mysticism, I eventually came to Al-Buni, and then later to more of the magical associations with these things. Some of the nitty-gritty on it is that much of the imagery that is used magically in the Ghayat al-Hakim, in the Picatrix, comes from this transmission of the nakshatras from India to the Middle East, the Persianate world, North Africa. Not that transmission, as we've been talking about, is just like a clean or pure one, because nothing pure really exists as far as I'm concerned in this world as it is, except God. But that transmission, there was quite a bit of slippage in that transmission. So I'll give an example that I've been increasingly fond of using. So in the magical image for the, let's see. Where are you? The 13th lunar station, the 13th Manzil, as it's translated, from the Picatrix, is the image of a man with an erection desiring a woman. Is that too R-rated for Watkins? No, we're good? Okay. The image is a big erection. Yeah. That's what it is. It's a man with an erection. So presumably it was for men. The talisman was for men to get laid. We're thinking about the cultural framework that this emerged from. It was probably for, all of the heteronormativity and everything aside with it, put that all aside, it was probably a talisman for men to get laid. But the primary image there, right, the main thing that everyone's going to focus on is the man with the erection. So you are to carve that image for the image magic's sake, let's say, to have the talisman work. Where does that image come from? So the Picatrix, we're talking about this kind of this milieu here of as I mentioned earlier, using auspicious astrological timing combined with the drawing of weird and sometimes creepy images, I guess, in various materials, silver, lead, what have you. That represents the magic with certain mystical and metaphysical underpinnings that the Sun of Knowledge or the Shams al-Ma'arif emerges out of, which is this combination of North African Islam and mysticism with what was happening in southern Spain, Muslim Spain at the time, and this beautiful crossroads which was unfolding, which I'm not sure if I talked about it, but lettrism. So this notion that letters and numbers have a magical efficacy to them. This is what the Sun of Knowledge emerges out of. And this is what mystics like Ibn Arabi are associated with more than anything else. That it is speech, it is word, it is breath. This is how Ibn Arabi imagines the imaginal as breath, contracting, opening and closing, opening and closing. This is what the Sun of Knowledge emerges out of. And these images, as they're, and this kind of mystical, once again, like I'm leaving out a lot of details here. Maybe we can talk more about that. But this sort of like kind of thinking that what we think of as like Kabbalism and the magic of letters and whatnot. This is the Sun of Knowledge. And the way that those images, which are used for magic in this sort of, I keep referring to it as a milieu because it very much was so, later ends up being formed, as well as the earlier instantiations of it. What is that procession? What is the movement of that night theater, right? Like, and how are those images shape-shifting there? Well, the oldest versions of that come from these transmissions from the nakshatras, come from India. So I'm going to, well, actually, I don't have to go back because they're already aligned in my book. But most books would see them as separate. The 11th Manzil, the 11th Arabic lunar mansion, and the 13th the 13th lunar mansion would be seen as separate, but I put them together because they're the same stars. And those are the stars of the butt, as well as the dirty bits of Leo. Which, if you look at some of the constellational diagrams, it will literally say the penis of Leo. I'm not sure how familiar people are with that, but that's a little dirty astrological secret for you. Why would the magical image used in this kind of magic, or the magic that you find in the Picatrix, why would it have a man with a phallus? Like, where does that come from? Are we examining the things that we find in our magical books? Well, to go back to the penis of Leo, the nakshatra is called the Falguni. So Falguni is the Sanskrit phala, which is fruit, but also we're looking at the root of the word phallus. And this is the penis of Leo. These are the Falguni nakshatras going all the way back to the Rig Veda, where we get these associations. So the nakshatras in the Vedic tradition are extremely ancient, if not the oldest. That you know, which is the oldest tradition of the lunar mansions? We don't know. We can't say. People tend to vie back and forth between the Chinese and the Vedic. We don't know, but we know in the Vedic tradition that they go at least as far back as the Rig Veda, and the Rig Veda as an oral tradition goes far further back than just the written one. So the penis of Leo, the phallus mansions, as I refer to them, but it's also literally what they are. In the Vedic tradition, they're the marriage bed. They form a kind of square in the sky, these stars, and this is a marriage bed. So this is where the marriage is consummated, right? And this is a place of procreation. It's a place of creativity. Astrologically, people who have important placements here, they tend to be extremely creative. And there are strong sexual associations, obviously, with it. So, you know, for all those people who are like, oh, draw the man with the phallus in silver when the moon's in this sign and whatever, like, well, where does that come from? Precession can tell you where that comes from. The movement from really the Indian nakshatras tradition to this milieu, the transmission of knowledge, the transmission of magic, but importantly of images, is exactly that. And I'm using a dirty one so all of you remember. That's why. It's so I remember. But it will burn itself into your mind all the more so. And so I don't think there's a better illustration than that. Perhaps that's not the most wholesome, but the transmission of astrological, magical information is all there. It's all summed up with the penis of Leo, and the magical image for the 13th Manzil. Wow, I can't believe I can't end with that. Or maybe I should end with that. That hasn't been 20 minutes.
But if you see the nakshatra, the Uttara and the Purva Falguni, their deities, the Vedic deities, where you'll get a big hint from Aryaman and Bhaga, they have huge connotations with creativity. So that ties up with the phallic symbol.
Doesn't even the name Bhaga have a certain connotation to it? Am I?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I wasn't gonna say it, but yeah. So they're.
Aryaman definitely does.
Okay.
So.
And yeah, I mean it's all in the language, right? It's all in the roots of the language itself. The phala, the fruit. Fruit is we're talking about the fruit that the tree. Right, it's all there. And so when you end up at these guys who are like, oh, we have the ancient Vedic, the ancient Indian sages and the transmission and all of the heaviness of that, it's like, well, also we're just looking at like kind of weirdo stuff like that being transmitted across cultures. And you can imagine certain things being edited out, but also certain like the blending, right, of fantasy and like science and astrology, TM, these kinds of things, which is what this book is all about. And how those lines of transmission are much weirder and stranger than we would ever give them credit for. And remember, we're talking about magic here. Magic is not, I mean, it's not physics, and it is physics, and it's everything in between. Magic is fucking weird, right? That's why I just almost ended talking about the penis of Leo. Because why the hell not? I work really well with inquiry and conversation. Maybe we could begin transforming into some like Q&A conversation. Yes.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the magic and stuff like that. So do you have any more examples of just how ancients were using those parts of the sky? What kind of other kind of things were they doing? Because obviously the one with the phallus and stuff like that, that is obviously, you know, someone wanting to have success, you know, in the bedroom or in the marriage bed, or maybe even like if they're traveling and, you know, there could be prostitutes, so, you know, what have you, you know, because of course back then people were doing traveling around everywhere. But what other things were they doing? What were they doing maybe for like safe voyage, or what are some examples of how people are using the sky for magic?
Are practical things. This is there's a lot of that in here, but as you said, things like travel. So the moon is a traveler, and this lunar station that we're in right now was thought to be a good one for initiating a journey, as I sort of alluded to when I said, it's my first time in London, like, this is great, I just got here, we're initiating a journey, all of us together. But yeah, like, when's a safe time to begin a journey? Absolutely. This lunar station. So things having to do with travel, and obviously travel was much more dangerous back in the day. So when you began a journey, you really wanted to know that. And then maybe when you ended a journey, with certain aspects of a journey, for sure. You have things as mundane in the lunar mansions as when to cut your hair and not to cut your hair. That's also a really important decision, I think, actually still to this day, very much so. You have things like...
But why? Why is there an auspicious or inauspicious time to cut your hair? What's that significance there with the energy of that?
Oh, because of astrology, or what would be referred to as astrology. So, astrology, TM, is that there are better times to do things and that there are worse times to do things. And of course, we don't have the time to get into the history or the epistemology of why that is the case, but.
Is it to do with the energy, like the whole Samson and Delilah thing? She was able to take his vow by cutting his hair. What was that connection in terms of why did the ancients see it so important to get that timing right, to cut your hair? So there's obviously something more energetic to do with the cutting of hair.
Yeah. So another one. Another one that we see in a lot of the Arabic texts is when to do cupping. What's the Arabic name for it? Yes. And so blood things like bloodletting. And the ideal times for cupping, bloodletting would be when the moon is moving through Scorpius.
Oh.
Why? Because Scorpio is, number one, a martial sign, and it's associated with bloodshed of some sort. So if you're not going to war, but you want to utilize the shedding of blood for something practical and for healing, then when the moon is in the sign of Scorpius, you would do that. Or a surgical procedure, right? And so what my very lofty, it's not lofty in my mind, but I get that people would think of it as lofty. The way that I connected what you're talking about is through image. People make that association through image. So we think of the stars, which are just dots in the sky, right? Just dots in the sky. In the area of Scorpius as a scorpion with a pokey tail. So when the moon, which is associated with daily activities, is lined up with the stars that we associate with the pokey tail, we do the things that involve the pokey tail.
That makes sense.
Quick question.
Yeah.
About the sidereal and tropical calendar.
Sure.
Is it the case that when they were aligned, and you said every 72 years it moves process
about 1 degree.
1 degree. Is it an error in Western astrology to not observe that deviation, 24 degrees, as you said? Or is it, because in my view, yes, they were once aligned, then obviously that precession has taken place.
Yeah.
And it's as if we're still measuring it from 0 degrees Aries. Should Western astrology be just keeping up with that precessional movement? Is it an error that they didn't realize that they should be? What's your take on that?
I personally would not refer to it as an error, but I prefer to, and many would call this a cop-out on my part or an excuse, but I prefer to do something which is liminal and in between with it, which feels more magical for me and is how this book emerged. So when I mentioned that I use precise tropical coordinates, the reason that I wouldn't refer to it as an error is because the zodiac of the sun, which I do talk about this in the introduction, the zodiac of the sun is not really all that, and Vedic astrologers would probably disagree with me on this, is not really based on the stars as much. Many of the interpretations that we have for the 12 sign solar zodiac come from things like seasons and the northern hemisphere bias of certain seasonal associations, Aries, Taurus with spring, etc., etc. Not all of the associations, but many of them do. And so in that sense, the connection between the stars of Aries, like looking up in the sky and seeing the actual stars, and what we think of as the one of the 12 signs of Aries, there's a really, really big difference there. So I, in my own practice, am willing to leave that difference as a separate practice, which would be referred to as like 98% of Western astrology. But for this, because we're talking about stars, and we're talking about the moon, which another thing that I'm fond of doing in my presentations is showing people just the seemingly obvious difference, but I don't think actually so obvious, between when we look up at the moon, when we can see stars in the sky, and when we look up at the sun and you don't see any stars in the sky. The sun is a star, and we oftentimes forget that, but it's a bossy star that doesn't allow any other stars to be visible. The moon is not so. The moon, and I talk about this in the introduction, the moon is open to the plurality of the cosmos in a way that the sort of like demiurgic nature of the sun is just like, well, I'm the only game in town. I'm the leader of the pack. The moon is a little bit more pluralistic, still a leader. And I think the difference between that very visible phenomena, and in this way it's not abstract to me, the difference between that visible phenomena is that the lunar zodiac, I think, should remain at some level sidereal. And by sidereal I mean still in touch with actually being able to look up at the moon and to see its relationship with the stars that are around it. Bye. A visible difference that to me is the primary difference between, and why I divided this book between day side and night side. It's a kind of difference in consciousness between daytime consciousness and nighttime consciousness. And so the lunar zodiac partakes of, I would say, nighttime consciousness more than anything else. But we're still using kind of standardized system to reckon the lunar zodiac, and we refer to it as a zodiac, which is why I do something in between. And that was a very roundabout way of saying that I wouldn't refer to the tropical zodiac as an error, but this and the lunar stations I think is somewhere in between. I hope that... Do you disagree? Do you see it as an error?
I don't want to hog the floor. My main thing is that this difference between the tropical and the sidereal, it becomes critical when, in fact, I kind of was ifing and butting when you make the connection between India's nakshatras and North Africa. What we should look at is go south in Africa and look at ancient Ethiopia, Nabda Playa, all the ancient monuments that align with the sidereal, astronomical, observable, energetic, mathematical, scientific observation.
Absolutely.
And what I'm concerned about is that the tropical, like for example, full moon in Pisces, just gone, would have been full moon in somewhere else using the tropical system.
Yeah.
You cannot energetically and mathematically align and do your spiritual, magical work if you're being offset by the tropical approach. That is really my concern.
Okay.
That what you want to do, if you say, okay, I can observe from our Earth center the moon in a certain constellation, the sun in a certain constellation, you want to be able to measure that.
Yeah.
And no, the tropical system doesn't give you that observable, mathematical, scientific approach. That is really the background to my question.
Yeah, and I just think that there are a variety of ways that we could do that, and there are a variety of ways that it is done. And the epistemology that I use is that I would refer to with the tropical zodiac as being like out of alignment in that way wouldn't be like an astronomical epistemology or like a physical science epistemology in terms of lining things up, but would be more something that you could refer to as necromancy or ancestor worship, in the sense that I believe there is magical efficacy in things that are done with repetition, and that repetition has its own power. So in the Arabic tradition, if you have people who are using the tropical or in any tradition, the tropical zodiac just as an example for even 1,000 years, even 500 years, that there is a power to these ceremonial, ritualistic, magical, however you want to refer to them, processes that are just repeated in people doing things a certain way. Even if it doesn't necessarily have the kind of mathematical precision that you're talking about, that's one way that I would think of it, but...
I could say a lot more.
Okay.
I don't want to hog the floor.
Send me an email.
What it is, the reason, remember, calendars were created within that same North African, ancient Africa, Ethiopia, that were able to time things over thousands of years by observing, same with the decans and all the other measurements. It was actual precision. So you cannot then come along and then fix something when we know there is a precessional movement. And obviously you will know by that, over thousands of years, that precessional clock is used to measure historical events.
Yeah.
So to me, it's something I'm still questioning. That's why I just want to hear other people's views. That you can't just keep a fix when we know there's movement taking place.
Totally, and I mean
it's cycles, and that cycle comes back around after 2,500 years. So you've got to take into account that there's movement.
I'm upstairs.
Oh, okay. We'll talk later.
It's not an option. It's not things move. There's cycles and movement. My inclination is that the fixed tropical Western, when there was an alignment, fine, everything was. But then, okay, things have moved on since then, and you've got to. And the fact is, you're probably familiar with Norman Lockyer, his book on the ancient monuments of Kemet. Norman Lockyer, the author of. Inventor of nature, he's got an observatory down in the south of England. We knew that certain alignments, certain temples were built with certain alignments.
Yeah.
The energy of the moment. And after that alignment moves on, it was rebuilt and reoriented towards a certain direction. Totally. Because you want to catch the energy of the time, of the moment.
Yeah.
So you cannot then come along, okay, I'm going to keep it fixed. That is my questioning.
At the end of the day, excuse the pun, I actually pretty fundamentally agree with you.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, and this book is about precession and sticking with precession. So, like, yeah, I do agree with that, and I do agree with sticking with precession. But I wouldn't go as far to say that tropical astrology is an error, because I'm also just as interested in that weird slippage between things and the strange, monstrous, chimerical creatures which emerge out of the differences in the ways that cultures and individuals handle these kinds of things. Maybe that's more my art brain as opposed to my like star tracking brain. But once again, like, this is a book about precession. It's in the title, and that is how I choose to use the lunar stations, with precession. So.
I agree with you, by the way. You do? I do.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for coming from New York.
Thank you. It's very good.
Thank you.
The most amazing energy.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
No, seriously. So I just thank you.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
I've been loving London so far.
Do you do talks in New York?
Yeah, from time to time. Yeah. So if anyone's follow me on Instagram, on my website and everything. And if any of you are coming through New York, please come by and hang out.
In New York?
In Brooklyn, yeah. Thank you.